but hopefully you bear with me. If there's anything that comes up, you will have to unmute yourself because I can't see you. Okay, so, well, welcome. Thank you for being here. Today we're talking about building career resilience. And this is part of the workshop series on jobs beyond academia and the Tenure Track Workshop Series. And this is going to be a little different today because, well, the other sessions are led by Carolyn Wu and Mackenzie Sullivan, and they're just expert career people with tons of experience and years of experience of helping grad students find jobs. While my perspective is more that one of a peer. I'm speaking from my own experience and what I've learned, and hopefully you will find that useful. It is going to be a pep talk and maybe a glorified pep talk, we'll see. So to me, my background is in German studies. I got my PhD from the University of Minnesota in 2017. I spent 2 years in a visiting assistant professor position at Middlebury College in Vermont. And then I had a tenure track position at Wofford College in South Carolina. They're both small liberal arts colleges. And I was there for 2 years as well. And then I was also on a search committee there for a tenure track position. So I've learned a lot about the academic job market from applying, but also from going through the search process from the other side, which was really helpful. Unfortunately, I was in a really toxic department and then the pandemic hit. So after 2 years, I quit my tenure track position. And now I've been in administration at the College of Liberal Arts for the last 4 or 5 months. And specifically, I'm in the Office of Research and Graduate Programs and the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. So lots of experience in the job market, especially with the academic job market, probably a little too much. Okay, so another thing you should know is that my perspective, of course, I'm in the humanities and I now work with students in the College of Liberal Arts. And in many of those fields, the jobs are very limited. And people in the humanities have a strange profile. I will talk more about that later. That is a little difficult to translate sometimes to other industries. So I know that this is not everybody's experience, and you might be in a field where there's plenty of jobs, and it's easy to find something outside of academia as well. But just so you know, this is my background. And I'm going to really try to keep the cynicism generally down. Okay, so first, let's start talking about why career resilience is important to begin with. And since I'm a media scholar and you asked me to present, there will be clips and there will be pop culture. So this is a clip from the show Bunheads from 2012. And the main character, her name is Michelle. She's a showgirl in Vegas and her friend got her an audition. And let's just watch that clip, what happens.
Hi, excuse me, I'm looking for Jimmy Houston.
Michelle, hi, you're on time.
Jimmy, hi, I'm ignoring the surprise in your voice.
I'm sorry, it's just a little crazy here today. Okay, so the job is 6 weeks here in Vegas, 6 months on the road. The director is Gary Janetti. I've told him all about you.
Whoa.
With editing.
Thank you.
Gary, this is Michelle Sims. I told you about her. She's auditioning for the swing position.
I'm so excited to dance for you.
I've already run her through the routine, so whenever you're ready.
No,
What?
But I'm 25.
she's not right.
She's really good.
Please, just let me show you the routine. I swear you won't be sorry.
Gary, please, for me.
I'm sorry, Jimmy. I'm sure you're great. Good luck.
Where was that list? No, the list that you just had. Gary, please, just give me 5 minutes with this girl. I promise you, she's nothing.
Okay, so of course, this is a crushing moment. And I think we all had those moments of no, and especially in the job market, that happens a lot. Most people apply to more jobs than they get. And it is something that will stick with you. So in the show, Michelle actually has dreams about this moment, about different instances of the snow coming back at her. And that's also how it feels. The emotional investment in the job market is really high, and it can be really difficult to deal with. So on the one hand, of course, I feel for her. This is devastating. They didn't even look at her routine. They didn't even carefully consider that she's actually 25. And they didn't consider that she might be brilliant. despite whatever her type is. On the other hand, I'm almost a little bit envious that she got an immediate response, at least, instead of 8 months of waiting for a search committee for them to get an automated rejection. So they always say, don't take rejection personally, but how can you not? It's impossible. Of course, this is your investment, your life. You might have been crafting your materials really carefully for weeks, and they wouldn't even really look at it. And still, you could just get a rejection.
Hi, excuse me.
So I'm going to talk about, even though we're focusing on careers outside of academia, I'm going to talk about the academic job market a little bit, because this is the default for many of us, and then about leaving academia, transitioning out of academia, and then just a little bit also about the job market beyond academia. I think it's important that we talk about the tenure track job market, since oftentimes it is like the old straight white dude of academia. That's the default. That's what you're supposed to be wanting. It requires lots of attention, very tone deaf to everybody around him, very easily inconvenienced, and does not like any change. So let's talk about why we're even interested. How do we get on the tenure track academic job market? Of course, it's the best use of our skills and knowledge. This is what we're trained for. My research, my latest project was about the uncanny and contemporary Austrian horror film. Nobody else besides the university would pay me for this kind of research. This might be different in your field, but in my field, I don't think I would find anybody. And then, of course, there's a lot of passion for our subjects. This is, after all, why we got into grad school. We're passionate about our discipline. We're passionate about our project. And besides not anybody paying me for my research, also nobody would pay me for, in terms of time and resources, to continue with this kind of research. Academia is what we're familiar with. We know it. Many of us never were on like a full-time job market before going to grad school. So it's hard to imagine what life would be like, and misconceptions that Carolyn talked about last week, the misconceptions we might have about academia, but also about the for-profit world, for example, that is a reality. We don't really know until we live it, and change is hard. There's a lot of flexibility that comes with faculty appointment. So besides teaching, your hours are very flexible. You can do your own projects. A lot of the time you have the freedom to choose whatever projects you want to do within certain limitations. There might be sabbaticals, which is exciting. Your summers you can spend with your projects however you like. You have very flexible hours then. And it's a very cyclical market. So we're always in academia thinking about the next thing. We are applying for conferences for next year and planning our classes maybe for 2 years ahead, because you have to get that proposal in. And when I started one of my new jobs, within 2 months, I had to apply to the next job again. So it's very easy to just stay in this cycle and not really, it's hard to interrupt the cycle. And then, of course, there's a lot of prestige and recognition that comes with the job of a professor. And there's a lot of illustrious examples from media and films where the professors are very specific trope, is very specific type. And then, of course, our professors want us to become professors because that's what works. And we see what kind of life they have. And maybe that's what we want too. So with all that being said, what's the problem? And there are plenty. So first, there are vast differences between different kinds of positions. You can make 40K as a tenure track assistant professor, or you can make 90K. You can live in a vibrant, exciting city, or you can be in a very small town in a rural area where the next city is 5 hours away. Maybe there's actually no money for research. So even though you're passionate about your projects and you have the time to pursue them, you might not have any support for it. You might have a really high teaching load where there's just no time for your own projects. And even with teaching, you might have to teach something that's very specific, that's not really your thing, or you might have to teach something that's very general, where you never actually get to talk about the things you are passionate about. then there's life, and life happens. So even though you might have a good position, it might be in a really high cost of living area. You might have a partner that's academic too and at a different institution. You might consider, do I want to raise kids in whatever place where your job is? You might want to be close to family. It might also end up being a place where maybe your personal rights are restricted. Do you want to end up spending your life there? You might want to pursue certain personal hobbies that don't really agree with that kind of job. So in some ways, it's a very, very inflexible job as well. So a lot of the time, people don't have the luxury of negotiating multiple offers or being too selective on where they apply. So you have very little say in where you're actually going to end up. There is not a lot of upward movement, at least for the first maybe 10 years. And depending on your institution, you're actually on probation for about 6 years, which is crazy. That's not something that exists outside of academia to that extent. And it's just normal for us, but in the end, it's a little insane. And then you might be stuck with your colleagues and your department for the rest of your career, which could be a good thing, but it could also be really challenging. And then the cyclical market also has the problem of having very long and specific application cycles. So you apply, depending on your field, in the fall, then there's all the interviewing and everything wrapping up in early spring, and then you wait for the next fall. So it all takes years. And of course, really important, it's a predatory system. Universities and colleges generally are very interested in PhDs to stay on the market because they can be exploited for very cheap labor as visiting assistant professors, as adjuncts. And again, those situations can be very different and can be really rewarding positions, but overall, it is not making a commitment to those workers. Finally, the job market is very limited, depending on your field. But generally, it has been going down in a lot of fields, and it's just gotten worse with the pandemic. And often there's not maybe a good awareness in your discipline about the actual numbers of it. So make sure that you research your own field and you actually know how many people are getting jobs, how long does it take them to get jobs, where are those jobs, how do they pay. So just as an example from my own job, this is from a blog that actually collected all the numbers from the last, 70 years. So would you have the 60s in the beginning where it's almost 80, 90 tenure track positions in a year. And then at the very end of 2010s, you have 20s. And actually in 2020, 2021, there were 4 jobs in German studies. So even if you're great, these numbers just are crushing. Just another example from the American Historical Association. They said also for 2020, 2021, it had the fewest professorial job listings in history since the AHA first started keeping records in 1975. So when people say, oh, the market is looking good, make sure that you understand if that is actually a value judgment based on numbers and actual records, or is it just something that's based on feeling because they saw more job postings. So at the core of all this is we have too many PhDs, not enough jobs, but we still believe that it is a meritocracy. And that means what you always hear, good people do get jobs. And of course, that completely ignores that what those good people had to sacrifice for those jobs, what they had to go through, how long did it take them, did they have to move across country? So this is one of those myths that are very persistent. And of course, we want to believe in them. We want to believe that we contribute to a system where merit and quality work is the most important. But unfortunately, a lot of the time, that's just not how it works. So one problem with that is that departments look for something very specific sometimes. And that can be in terms of who you are as a person, who you are as a scholar, what kind of work you produce, but also your specialization. There are trends that are just more in demand at sometimes and not at other times. And of course, we work on a dissertation for years. So it's not easy to just say, oh, I realize this is the trend now, so I'm just going to change everything. And I have an example again from Michelle. She went to a big audition. She had to wait outside for hours with hundreds of other dancers. And this is what happens in the first round.
Thank you all for coming out today. At least the weather's beautiful and you could get a tan. We are looking for very specific types for our course, so I apologize in advance if this has been a waste of time.
Okay, form your lines, please.
No, 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 nope, 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 no.
Of course, this seems very harsh, but it is very much a reality for the academic job market as well. When I was on a search committee, we used a matrix, which is actually a good thing. We made sure that we're actually hiring for what we set out to hire. There were 8 criteria, and we were looking at candidates that meet all those 8 criteria. And there were enough candidates where we did not have to negotiate those. So this first step was really just looking, do you meet those criteria, and make sure that only those people can advance. So that first round can be really harsh looking, but it has to be efficient. And it still hurts because, of course, maybe you thought you're a perfect fit and you definitely meet all those criteria, and you put all the time and energy into your materials, and they don't even really look. They just look to go on a checklist. And of course,
thank you all for coming out today.
With the job market being so competitive, the expectations are also much higher than they used to be. So just for example, when I was at Wofford College, small liberal arts college, that just recently made a shift from very teaching focused to more research focused. And when I was hired, I had published more articles and more research than some of my full professor colleagues. So you can imagine that that is a very interesting situation to be in. And a lot of the people who were hired at an institution 20 years ago with the profile that they had 20 years ago would not be competitive now. Doesn't mean that if they were on the market now, they couldn't be that. So we have that first round that's very often based on a matrix and then very specific criteria. But then when it comes to interviewing, there's a lot of other personal preferences and also personal biases that come into play that we don't talk about as much. It always seems like we should hire the best person, but there's also something like the overall impression of a person. And fit, which is often used to hire somebody who might be actually less qualified or might have less publications or less teaching experience, but they're a better fit. And that's understandable too, because in the end, those faculty members also have to spend the rest of their career with that person maybe. So they want to find somebody who fits with their culture. But that is also not really in line with this belief in a meritocracy. Also, some people just interview better than others. Is that fair? I don't know. And then finally, we have the dreaded internal candidates. And so Michelle on the show, she went through all the steps. She made the cut of not being a no. She got to dance, she got to sing, she packed up, and now she has a conversation with one of the people involved in the hiring.
You were terrific, by the way.
Yeah.
Best I heard all day. I mean it. Apparently the Jews are leaving Egypt again.
Who are they?
Those are the dancers.
The dancers.
For the show.
For this show?
Yep.
So the spots we just auditioned for are
Gone. Weeks ago. This choreographer hires the same girls no matter what. The unions make us hold these open calls. So annoying. I hate these things.
You hate these things.
Hey, listen, if you're ever in New York, I'm always putting together showcases and benefits. I'd kill to have a triple threat like you who can belt a C in the mask with vibrato. I'll give you my card. If I can find one.
Seth, we're back.
Oh, crap. I'll find you. Coming.
So where do internal candidates even come from? A lot of the time, schools still have to post a job, even though they have a preferred candidate that might already be at their institution, maybe even not, but they still have to go through the motions. They have to bring people to campus, they have to interview them and spend all that time, which is of course a huge waste of time for the candidate, but also for the search committee. And it's just soul crushing if you realize that you never had a chance because they had this person in mind and they just had to go through the motions to fulfill some policies. At the same time, there are stories of people that were internal candidates and didn't get those jobs. So I'm always between really frustrated with these situations, but at the same time, I'm also celebrating when an internal candidate gets a job because they are already invested in the place. They already put in the labor there. So if the institution values that and hires them long-term, that's also great. I can't really be mad at that. So if any of this happens to you or any of this just doesn't work for you, it is not you, it is the system. And if you don't end up in a tenure track position, you are not a failure. That is the most important point of my presentation today. So it is really important to realize that even if you don't follow this very specific path that sometimes people make you feel like it's the only option that you have, it is not, and you are not failing anything or anybody. So why do we feel like it so many times? And that's really closely connected to that meritocracy myth that if you're very good, we get to the peak of our system, we get rewarded with this tenure track position. And it's important to remember that academia is just not just a job for many. And it's almost like a very toxic relationship that's really difficult to leave. And I always wonder why that is. And we have really interwoven our professional and personalities so much. And that's how academia works. There's a lot of emails at all times. It doesn't stop. There's a lot of free labor that's just standard. And that's true for faculty as well. So you're on committees, you might be publishing, you're not getting paid for publishing, you're doing peer review. Those are all things that are expected, but it's really hard to say what is your personal life and what is your professional life. And leaving is very difficult. There's a lot of Quizlet out there that deals with what people go through. It's very difficult. For myself, I realized that sometimes I have these moments of grieving for my faculty career that I know I left on my own terms and it is okay, but sometimes I just can't get over it and see myself in different institutions and different places. But people have actually always left academia. This is not something new. We just don't talk about it much. And that is not failure. It's a way to prioritize the things that make you happy. And maybe academia is not what makes you happy. Okay, so with the pandemic, of course, there's a big resignation wave that people still talk about, and that it has also reached academia. And why is that? Obviously, the pandemic has exacerbated problems in many systems. So at universities, suddenly the workload was a lot higher, work-life balance was out the window, there were hiring freezes, pay cuts, maybe sometimes freezes on promotions and salary increases, cut back on funding. There also seemed to be a certain indifference to instructors' health and safety when it came to getting back on campus and getting back in the classroom. The professors out, they crowdsourced reasons for leaving among scholars. It's a public document. I also linked it on the Canvas page, and there's almost 500 entries by now, and it's all ranks, all disciplines, and it's very illuminating to read. So it's really asking people, why did you leave? What made it worse? Where are you now? And it's really validating to see that so many people went through the same thing. It's not a good thing. Ideally, we could fix the system, but since that's at least not kind of happened for me, I feel comfort in that community. So now you might decide you still want to go for the tenure tech career. Great. I just want you to know what it is like, and have open eyes about it, and know that even if it doesn't work out, that says nothing about you as a person. So just be prepared. But maybe you realize, well, maybe I don't want to go for that. Or maybe I want to do both. Maybe I want to try my luck on the tenure track market, but also look for other opportunities. The question is, how do we do this? And hopefully this series will give you a lot of different tools that you can utilize to make happen whatever you would like to happen. I'm just going to give you some perspective and some advice. So this is from last week's presentation from Carolyn Wu, and I really like this graphic. So you have the job search process that is a cycle. So self-assessment, explore, research, material, interview, offer. And I really like that it feeds into itself. So it's not something that stops. You're probably going to have more than one job in your lifetime. So you will have to start over this eventually. But one thing to keep in mind, so for me personally, it was not this perfect circle at all. The self-assessment and explore and research part were actually much, much, much bigger, and they're still ongoing. In comparison, I did not spend that much time on my resume interviewing. Even the offer is a short amount of time in comparison to thinking about your interests, your skills, your experiences, priorities, and so on. And I think the further your new career is away from what you're trained for, the more difficult it will be, and the more it will feel like I'm not making progress. I still don't know what I want to be. I still don't know what my new career is. And that is normal, and it is okay, and it is a process. So yes, the other aspect of this is that it is all interwoven. So even though those arrows go in a circle, you will also have arrows that going in all ways. So for myself, for instance, skills, when I looked at transferable skills, I realized I don't have any skills. And also the skills that I do have, they don't translate to anything else. For example, I'm a great teacher, but I do not want to teach outside of higher ed. So how does that help? Or I can present and do public speaking. What does that translate to? Maybe being a politician? And the same was true for my values. I realized, or I decided at some point, I do not want to go back into mission-driven work. I don't want a vocation. I just want a job. And then all the interviews I got and all the finalist positions I had were all situations where I talked extensively about how mission-driven I am. So I only learned through this process so many things about myself. And I had to be in the market to realize those things and realize what are my skills, what are my values, what am I actually interested in. And so I would encourage you to skip ahead and skip around in this process. Don't think that you will get to the place where you're saying, okay, now I have it figured out. This is the career I'm going for. Now I'm going to start applying. Apply to random things that look interesting. You might learn something along the way. And this is just normal, but still, it is helpful to keep in mind that you're not alone if you feel like you're not figuring it out. It is very hard. So some more advice. Again, this is from a peer perspective, and continue to go through this. And I will be going through this for probably maybe the rest of my career, the rest of my life. It's a process. It is not, there's no end point. You just have to go through all the different aspects of it. And your career might not be as straightforward as getting a tenure track position and then staying in that position for the next 30 years. And it will feel hard and really unfair. And you might start in a position that is not you at all, but you might actually learn something about it as well. And not to, also, I want to be mindful that it's also a matter of privilege, how much and to what extent you can do that, and that you might just need a job to actually put food on your table. So this process, of course, is exacerbated and by your circumstances. Carolyn talked about celebrating your successes, and I really want to just emphasize that. And I want to say celebrate along the way. Maybe don't only celebrate your success, your interviews or your offers that you get, but also celebrate how many applications you sent out, how many informational interviews you conducted, how much research you did. It's important. It's great if you're doing anything. And again, Carolyn last week had really great examples of how you set really good goals that are actionable. And I just want to emphasize that I really believe in very firm boundaries. And that can be in any aspect of your job. So it might be about the location, about your salary range, it might be about your values, it might be about, do you want to work with people or not? But set your boundaries, know yourself. So when I was looking for a tenure track position, I set my boundaries as a 2-year time frame. If in those 2 years after my PhD, I don't get a tenure track position, I would leave. I did get that job, so that worked. I also was very firm of, I do not want to adjunct. That will just not work for me. And I, of course, I used to be an international student, so I was dependent on a visa. So that put a restriction on that as well. So now my boundaries have changed. I'm more interested in certain freedoms, of a possibility to grow. Prioritize whatever is worth prioritizing to you. And just make sure that you think about what your boundaries are and what you're not willing to do. And in this whole process, attend to your emotions. This can be very hard and frustrating, and those feelings are normal. I just want to validate again, whatever you're feeling, if you're feeling desperate, that is normal and it is valid and it is important. So to deal with those emotions, do whatever works for you. And that can be meditation, exercise, gaming, therapy. Do research if research fulfills you. But take the time to actually look at your emotions and give them room, because this is just as much of the growth process as your resume. And then finally, practice curiosity. And that is really something that you can do even if you're not in the job market, and from the start of your PhD really, or for your master's, or if you're done on your postdoc. Talk and listen to other people, do informational interviews, learn what they do on a daily basis. And even if it's not something that you would ever consider doing, it is still worth it learning others' perspective, because it might be a field that you never thought about, but there might actually be a job that would be perfect for you that you had not even on your radar. Also apply to things outside of your comfort zone. If it goes nowhere, then it goes nowhere. Just be open. That's it for my glorified pep talk. Thank you. And now we have time for questions. Any questions? You can unmute yourself, you can put in the chat.
Maria, can you talk a little bit about, with your new position and your position